Multiteller, village by village mix.
All entrances to North Vietnamese ports will be mined. United States forces have been directed to take appropriate measures within the internal and claimed territorial waters of North Vietnam to interdict the delivery of any supplies. Air and naval strikes against military targets in North Vietnam will continue. And that is why, my fellow Americans, tonight, I ask for your support of this decision. A decision which has only one purpose: not to expand the war, not to escalate the war, but to end this war and to win the kind of peace that will last.
We were all surprised when the telephone calls came inviting us to visit Hanoi. None of the four of us had applied for permission to visit North Vietnam, and we assumed that the invitations came as a result of the anti-war work that we had all been doing. The four of us on the trip were the Reverend Robert Leacock, who's editor of American Report, a weekly anti-war newspaper published by clergy and laity concerned. Father Paul Mayer, a theologian at the New York Theological Seminary, who's been very active in the religious anti-war movement and was a member of the Harrisburg Defense Committee. Marjorie Tabankin, who's president of the National Student Association in Washington, a group that sponsored many educational programs and demonstrations against the war. I'm Bill Zimmerman. I used to be a psychology professor. Now I work full-time for Medical Aid for Indochina. Medical Aid for Indochina raises money to purchase medicines, medical equipment, and supplies, which it sends to North Vietnam and the areas of South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia being bombed by the United States. We stay in constant communication with representatives of the health services of those countries so that we're made aware of their most immediate needs. None of the four of us had ever made films before this trip, but we felt it was important to record what we saw and heard as efficiently as possible. We took 2 Super 8 film cameras, a number of still cameras, and a cassette tape recorder. The Vietnamese told us that we would be able to see anything we liked in North Vietnam, that we would be able to speak to anyone we wished to, but that we would not be able to film structures or locations which could become targets for the United States military. Hanoi, May 21st. During the air raids, the four of us sit in the shelters, dazed and confused, trying to digest the enormity of what's happening outside and our relationship to it. It's impossible not to feel guilty of being associated somehow with the American bomber pilots overhead. Yet at the same time, we know that lots of us have been working for a long time to stop this war. And that really makes me feel closer to the Vietnamese being bombed than to the Americans dropping the bombs. When the raids end, we watch all the civil defense wardens, medical evacuation teams, and gunners metamorphosize back into waitresses, cooks, hotel clerks, drivers, and so on. It all seems to be routine to them. The sirens go off, they stop their normal work, do what has to be done during the raid, and then at the sound of the all-clear siren, they resume their work as though nothing had happened. Their survival now depends on their ability to respond to attacks in a calm and orderly way. But the calmness seems to be more than a defensive posture. It's part of the pace of life here. It's so strange to me that walking the streets of Hanoi, I feel more peaceful and more at ease with the people around me than I have in any other country I've been to. Late this afternoon, we strolled through Reunification Park, built by the young men and women of Hanoi, and dedicated to the idea that Hanoi, Hue, and Saigon were once the three centers of a single country, and someday will again be part of a single Vietnam. It's a fitting symbol of the love these people have for their land and culture. We leave tonight by car for Hai Phong and the surrounding area. After a 24-hour stay, we'll leave tomorrow night for Nam Dinh, the country's third largest city. Like the Vietnamese, we must travel at night to avoid the bombers. Quat said our schedule will be rushed because of the danger, but that we will have an opportunity to see the countryside in wartime conditions. We drove across the wide, flat area of the Red River Delta, past long, straight dikes and canals and endless rice paddies to the village of Phuc Loc. The village was small, a square about a half mile on each side. There were thatched roof adobe huts and a village threshing floor full of rice. On April 16th, at 2:30 a.m., Phuc Loc was carpet bombed by B-52 bombers. Carpet bombing means that the bombs are dropped so close together that the craters left by them are almost overlapping. The bomb pattern was rectangular, a half-mile long and a quarter-mile wide. Half the village was destroyed. All 142 bomb craters were inside the village boundaries. We didn't see a single one in the surrounding fields.
We heard the bombs falling 15 minutes earlier in the direction of Hai Phong, but few sought shelter. No one believed that the American pilots would want to destroy our village. I am an old man. There were 17 in my family. 10 were killed that night and 7 seriously injured. Of the 10 killed, there was only one body left.
We spoke with a boy of 13 years. He lost both parents, 2 grandparents, and 3 brothers. He spoke again and again of his desire to grow quickly so he could join the army and avenge the death of his family.
The first attack on the city of Hai Phong in the current escalation occurred on April 16, 1972. The American planes came in the middle of the night at 2:15 a.m. They bombed the harbor and 3 housing projects. The damage done to the housing was much greater than the damage to the harbor. 7 hours later, at 9 a.m., the planes returned and struck 2 hospitals and the same 3 housing projects. People who had returned to their homes to sift through the wreckage and recover some of their possessions were hit a second time. At 4 p.m. the same day, these same houses were attacked a third time. 244 civilians died and 513 were wounded. This pattern of striking the same residences in repeated attacks also occurred on the 8th and 9th of May. On May 18th, there were more repeated attacks against the third group of houses. They are trying to destroy our city, neighborhood by neighborhood.
On April 16th, when the American planes returned at 9 a.m. for the second attack, they bombed 2 targets in addition to the housing projects, the Key Dome Hospital and the Vietnamese Czechoslovakian Friendship Hospital. The hospitals were struck as doctors were treating the victims of the 2 a.m. raid. We met a boy who was wounded at home at 2 a.m. and then wounded again while on the operating table at 9 a.m.
Thế và ban đêm trong khi cháu đương ngủ thì gia đình cháu bị bom.
That night when he was sleeping, his family was bombed.
Bố cháu là một công nhân lái xe bị chết.
His father, who was the driver, got killed.
Anh cháu cũng bị chết.
His elder brother got killed too.
Thế và 2 người nữa, trong đó có cháu bị thương.
2 other members of the family, including himself, got wounded.
Mẹ cháu bị cụt chân.
His mother had one of her legs broken.
Thế cháu này bị một cái vết thương ở thọ rất nghiêm trọng.
He received a very serious wound on the skull.
Thế và chúng tôi đã phải mổ như thế, tức là 2 lần. Lần đầu tiên ngay ngày 16 tháng 4.
We had operated on him twice. The first time was immediately after the raid on April 16.
Và lần sau cách đây 1 tuần.
The second time was about a week ago.
Hôm nay thì cháu đã khá hơn.
Today he is better.
Cái quá trình để mà phấn đấu để giành giật cái sự sống cho cháu là một cái quá trình hết sức là gian khổ.
The work of saving his life was very hard process.
Chúng tôi càng phấn khởi với cái việc thành công của chúng tôi bao nhiêu đó, thì chúng tôi càng hết sức căm phẫn đối với cái hành động hết sức tàn bạo là mang bom đi ném vào đầu trẻ con của mình.
The happier we are with our success in saving his life, the deeper our hatred toward those who have bombed even children.
10 tuổi thì chắc chưa phải.
This morning we went through the areas that were bombed yesterday. It was staggering. Block after block just wasn't there. Twisted pipe and reinforcing rods. The broken remnants of furniture all piled up together with people picking through the whole mess trying to find their possessions. You could look across the street at intact buildings for a picture of what the nothingness on your side had been yesterday morning. Just past noon, they hit a residential area, a kindergarten, the city recreation club, a pagoda, and several street corners. Ordnance used yesterday. 500-pound demolition bombs, air exploding bombs, perforating bombs, steel pellet bombs. There have been 1,000 sorties in this province in the last 33 days. It amazes me how in these places that are being attacked so viciously and so constantly, the people on the streets can retain their gentleness and their spirit of cooperation. We drove by a huge textile mill that was totally destroyed. 3 blocks long, and there wasn't a single piece of anything undamaged. There were big craters, walls collapsed, rooms dangling over the sides of buildings smashed in half and burned. I stood by a crater, watching a woman walking along, looking at the mill and crying. I wonder if she worked there, or helped build it. 3 hours ago, they dropped anti-personnel bombs on our hotel. The backyard was littered with the ones that hadn't exploded yet. Some workers from the textile mill next door gathered to watch the bombs being removed and defused. We were all cautioned against wandering around the yard.
Chúng đã bỏ cái loại bom xuyên này xuống thành phố Nam Định.
This is one of the many kinds of bombs dropped here today by the American pilots. An anti-personnel perforating bomb.
Bom này là cái loại bom bỏ xuống nhằm để mà làm sát thương nhiều người dân thường.
It cuts through human bodies When dropped from a plane, this device penetrates deep into the ground.
Bom này nó xuyên xuống đất.
Anh để từ từ xuống đất.
Nó xuyên xuống đất như thế này và nó sẽ nổ tung ra để bắn những cái mảnh của nó bắn vào
When it reaches a depth of 50 to 60 centimeters, it explodes, sending out many hundreds of fragments.
Mỹ dùng cái loại bom này đấy càng chứng tỏ cái âm mưu của nó là muốn giết.
In using devices like this, the United States proves that its intention is to kill and maim many people.
The Air Force calls these bombs rock eyes. The Vietnamese call them perforating bombs. They used to be anti-tank devices capable of penetrating armor. Now they're fragmentation bombs and are used to penetrate underground shelters. The conversion was designed and manufactured by the Honeywell Corporation. May 24th, 8 a.m. We drove to the village of Bao Nu, 20 kilometers from Nam Dinh. Our cars went past a long section of river dikes, and the Vietnamese told us that by August, when the waters rose to flood levels, these dikes would be bombed. Members of the Bao Nu Village Committee described an air raid on May 12th when B-52s dropped demolition and anti-personnel bombs. Besides the craters, there were hundreds of tiny holes, pockmarks, and dents everywhere, in walls, cooking utensils, furniture. These dents and pockmarks hardly damage the buildings. They are not meant to. They're made by the pellets from the anti-personnel bombs, used exclusively to kill and maim human beings. The people have erected a monument of outrage to the American pilots.
At 12:30 on May 12, 1972, the American planes came to bomb this place, killing 8 persons, wounding 23 others, and burning 4 homes.
Trần Văn Dũng, 15 years old, on his way to school, was caught by a perforating bomb and killed. Bùi Thị Sài, 22 years old, a teacher, killed when her house was hit by a demolition bomb. Trần Trinh Ba, 25 years, a teacher at the daycare center, hit by perforating bombs, breaking both her hands and causing multiple wounds. She can no longer feed her 10-month-old baby. Trần Văn Thinh, 2 children, 1 killed, 1 wounded. Trần Hữu Tý, 3 children, 1 killed, 1 wounded. Trần Văn Lý, 5 children, 1 killed, 3 wounded.
Đây rất là gia đình chúng tôi là nông thôn làm ăn mà rất đau khổ mà rất.
One day, when my little boy had just returned from school, the planes came and dropped bombs near the water tank. Many fragments were sent out. My boy was hit on the breast. I rushed back and found him with both his hands clutching the bomb's fragment. It was very difficult for him to breathe. Blood was oozing out, and soon he was dead. We are ordinary peasants. We have not done anything to harm the Americans. For no reason at all, when the American planes come to strike, they strike like lightning and kill us. That's it. When you go home, gentlemen, please, enlighten your people about our plight. Thank you.
The use of pellet and fragmentation bombs by the United States has brought on a whole new era in modern warfare. In the War Crimes Museum in Hanoi, there are undetonated samples of all these anti-personnel weapons. There is the famous pellet bomb. 640 bomblets are packed into a single canister, which scatters them over a wide area as it falls. Each bomblet contains 300 small steel pellets. The bomblets strike the ground and spin along until they drop into a shelter hole or come to rest up against a building. The end of the spin triggers an explosion which sends the pellets out like tiny bullets in all directions. Sometimes hundreds of pellets wind up in a single body. The orange bomb is similar, only when it strikes the ground, it bounces back up to eye level so that the injuries sustained are around the more sensitive areas of head and chest. The rock eye bomb is made to penetrate shelters before fragmenting. One of these pellet bombs has a casing designed to fragment into small pieces of shrapnel. The casing is made from a specifically constructed radio-transparent plastic, which cannot be detected by X-rays, thus making it impossible for surgeons to find and remove the fragments. Another bomb has pellets made from soft metal instead of steel. These soft pellets flatten out after they enter the body, tearing more flesh internally and following very irregular trajectories so that removal is made more difficult. There are also flechettes, tiny steel darts shot by the hundreds from special guns. These anti-personnel bombs are useless against material targets. They will not harm an artillery piece, or a bridge, or a railroad track, or a truck. The pellets will not even penetrate the walls of a building. Their single purpose is to penetrate human flesh. And the pellets do not discriminate between soldiers and civilians. This morning at St. Paul's Hospital in Hanoi, we saw some of the civilian casualties of this war. The U.S. government uses weapons whose function is to produce horrible wounds, because that way more time and personnel are taken up in treatment. The Nixon administration also believes that the sight of so many walking wounded will undermine the morale of the Vietnamese people. But is this the case? I remember what the physician in the Haiphong hospital said to us. The depth of our anger is increased by the happiness we feel in saving this boy's life. The Vietnamese very carefully document everything that has been done to them, to remember it, to tell their children about it, to preserve it so that these atrocities will not easily be forgotten. Tonight we're meeting with 8 captured American pilots. They are the 8 pilots who addressed a letter to Congress protesting the April escalations of the air war. I've been thinking apprehensively about the meeting all day.
By introducing a group of people from the American anti-war movement who've been invited to North Vietnam by the government specifically to assess the bombing damage and to report back to the American people. And we are grateful for this opportunity of meeting with you. I'm Father Paul Mayer. I'm a theologian at the New York Theological Seminary, and I'm active in the religious anti-war movement. This is Marjorie Tabankin, who is the president of the National Student Association, Reverend Robert Leckie, who is the editor of the American Report, and Dr. William Zimmerman, who is a psychologist from Boston who works with medical aid to Vietnam. And I wonder if you'd be good enough to introduce yourselves.
Yes, I'm Captain James D. Cutter, Stillwater, Oklahoma. I was shot down on the 17th of February, 1972.
Norris Charles, Lieutenant J.G., Navy, shot down 30th of December, 1971.
Lieutenant Colonel Edison Miller, Marine Corps, shot down in October 67. From Clinton, Iowa. My family is presently in Tustin, California.
And I'm Commander Walter Eugene Wilbur, United States Navy. I was shot down in June 1968.
I'm David Hoffman, Lieutenant Commander in the Navy. I was shot down on the 30th of December of 1971. My home is in San Diego, California.
I'm Kenneth James Fraser, Captain, United States Air Force, home, Brooklyn, New York, and I was shot down on the 17th of February, 1972.
I'm Edwin A. Hall, Captain, United States Air Force. I was shot down on the 17th of February of this year in my home at Birmingham, Alabama.
I'm Len E. Gunther, Captain, United States Air Force. My home is the Dalles, Oregon, and I was shot down on the 26th of December, 1971.
Thank you. And I think one of the questions that is probably uppermost in everybody's mind is how you would describe the care that you have received from the North Vietnamese.
Well, the medical care has been very good. My injuries were treated promptly, and I had to have surgery done on my broken arm, and that's always been the case. The injuries have always been treated promptly, and whenever you required surgery, they were always there to give it to you. Plus, we have a doctor that comes around regularly to check on our health to see that we're all in good health.
Yes, there was one point that I wanted to make also, that as far as our status, that we are not prisoners of war, that we are detained Americans here. As far as the treatment is concerned, it's very good. We are fed very well. In fact, we receive better food than the Vietnamese people do because they're aware of our needs for a better dietary diet.
Several weeks ago, the eight of you issued a statement expressing your feelings about this that was addressed to Congress and to the American people. I'm sorry to have to say that it got very limited publicity in the United States. I wonder if one of you would be willing to give us the substance of that statement now.
I'd be happy to. Despite the fact that in 1968 the President of the United States announced a bombing halt over the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, since that time, in the intervening years, there have been numerous attacks on the territory of North Vietnam, with various reasons given to justify those raids. Most recently, on the morning of the 16th of April, Sunday morning, 16th of April, Hanoi and Haiphong were struck by numerous American aircraft with very significant loss in civilian casualties and in civilian targets. Now, we as a group of Americans detained here were shocked and struck by the futility of the action that was taken in those raids and in, if I might add to the statement a little bit, in the subsequent raids that have taken place. Despite what the pilots are told and what the majority of the American public seems ready to accept, we know, and I'm sure you have seen and know, that civilian targets are in fact being hit with civilian casualties, both injured and killed, and there can be no reason or excuse for that. Where the breakdown in the system is, we don't know. We know the pilots are told they are hitting military targets. Beyond that, we cannot know. We're not in any position to know. But you have seen it, and many other Americans who can openly say so, they don't have to take our word for it, have seen the damage. And finally, fourthly, we know that the American people want peace. We know that the way to peace is through withdrawal and negotiation, through the Paris Peace Conference. We want our country to go back to that conference and negotiate seriously towards that peace so that we can all go home and go home with some sense of pride in our country, not with despair.
We're aware of President Nixon's trip to Peking and now currently in Moscow. And of course, he could go to the moon. Oh, I suppose that's too much to hope for. But
he's not going to find peace except in talking to the Vietnamese people in Paris, their delegations in Paris. And we believe, as many of our leading spokesmen in the United States have stated, that the 7-point peace proposal of the Provisional Revolutionary Government is a very good basis for them to get together and make a political settlement of this issue.
President Nixon has justified the recent escalation of the bombing on the north and of the mining of the harbor at Haiphong because of his concern for the numbers of American prisoners of war. Do you feel that this is actually going to bring you and the other men home sooner?
Quite to the contrary. And let me make several points, and I think this goes back to the statement that we have already issued as a group. But in the first place, the bombing puts us in very real, very imminent personal danger every time it takes place. I don't know how to describe the feeling of being bombed. I don't think there are words that can possibly transmit it to the American people to make them understand that feeling. But it is very real and very personal. The bombing, as Lynn commented, has been demonstrated to be ineffective. It is not going to stop the Vietnamese will to fight, nor their will to continue, just as the blockade of any port really is not going to deter the Vietnamese spirit and their purpose in this war, if you will call it a war. The bombings only make it more likely that we're going to have to stay here much, much longer. And if there's anything that all of us want, it's to go home, to be with our families. We want that more than anything in the world. And yet, every airplane that comes through the sky here makes it that much more remote a possibility.
I don't know how to describe the churning feeling I have inside of me. The pilots were just ordinary men from back home in the States. Like so many others, they had once shared that blind American confidence that whoever or wherever we kill, God is always on our side. So they never questioned their orders, never sought to understand what the war was all about. And in the end, they volunteered to fly the planes and became the instruments of devastation and death. And today they are still being used. Nixon pretends his escalations of the war will get them home faster. He uses these men as an excuse to give other American pilots even more sophisticated bombs to drop on the people of Vietnam. Tonight they sat with us here in Asia in striped shirts, and we will be going home while they stay on here in their prison camps, possibly for years to come. I did have the sense of being a countryman of theirs. Yet, all week I've been looking at what my country, and men like these, have been doing to this country. Why are the 1972 bombing levels ordered by Nixon the highest in the history of the world? He claims the bombing is intended to incapacitate the North Vietnamese economy and interdict the flow of supplies to the south. 90% of the economy is agricultural, and you can't destroy an agricultural economy with aerial bombardment. The land areas are simply too vast. The supplies being moved down from the north to support the ongoing offensive in the south continued to flow, despite Nixon's claim that the mining and increased bombing would halt that offensive in 2 or 3 months. In South Vietnam, the American military has other options. They can use herbicides to destroy the farmland and force the villagers to relocate themselves in cities. They have an army on the land. There is an extensive prison system and a secret police force to keep the dictatorial II regime in power. In the north, the U.S. doesn't have these options. The American and worldwide anti-war movements have generated enough pressure to make a land invasion or the extensive use of herbicides politically disastrous for Nixon. Similarly with nuclear weapons. America's only remaining option is to try to produce chaos and social disorder in North Vietnam in an attempt to prevent the Vietnamese from carrying on the war. It is for this reason that weapons like anti-personnel bombs are deliberately and systematically used on the civilian population of North Vietnam. The U.S. is trying to terrorize them from within because they can't destroy them from without.
Our history is a history of resistance against foreign invaders. For centuries, we have fought against Chinese, Mongols. Then we have fought against the French, the Japanese, and now it is the turn of the United States. We have sacrificed much too much in our struggle for independence to abandon it now. Our stakes are too high. The United States is trying to terrorize the people into submission. They are systematically attacking village by village, neighborhood by neighborhood. But the US military do not understand the will of the people to fight. We have learned to protect ourselves. There are bomb shelters everywhere, not just in the cities, but in every village, along all the highways and roads. Facing the power of the machine, our people are putting forth all their energy, all their will to resist. The US Air Force has planes that can detect radar. So we use people to watch for the planes and set off the air raid sirens long enough in advance of an attack so that the people can take shelter. We have people whose job it is to count the bombs as they fall, so that later defusing squads can find and disarm them. We have factories in caves, which continues to produce medicines and vaccines. Our industry, schools, hospitals are still functioning. They are divided into smaller units and spread out throughout the countryside for protection. We have had to adjust our way of life because of the war, but still, the essence of our life hasn't changed. No amount of bombing, no threat can do so. We continue to perform and enjoy art, to work and live with dignity together. We have been preparing ourselves for the total destruction of Hanoi and Haiphong. We will not be terrorized into submission. The US cannot achieve a military victory. We will not bend to power. The only way to end this war is through a negotiated settlement that guarantees our independence, our freedom from all foreign intervention.
The Vietnamese in Paris insist that before an end to armed conflict, there must be a guarantee that Thieu be removed from power and that free and open elections be held throughout South Vietnam. Nixon offers a ceasefire and exchange of prisoners, and only afterwards the prospect of elections. In 1954, the Vietnamese signed a treaty with the French, which promised that elections would be held by 1956. They were never held, and now the Vietnamese will not stop fighting until free elections are ensured. Since we've been back from Vietnam, the Pentagon has denied on June 18th to CBS TV and on July 21st to NBC TV that they've ever bombed the village of Phu Quoc. Same Pentagon officials denied on June 18th that they dropped anti-personnel weapons on Nam Dinh. Today, they deny they're bombing the dikes. Nixon is trying to convince us that any flooding this year is the result of the dikes being weakened by the extremely heavy rains of last year. In fact, the dikes are stronger than they've ever been because last year's rains revealed the weak spots. And as we saw on our trip, the Vietnamese have been working night and day to solidify and reinforce them. Any flooding this year can only be the result of US bombing. Many Vietnamese are baffled by the viciousness with which they are being attacked, but they will not give up their desire for independence. They will manage to survive and to endure, so that someday their people can live united in peace.